This week, Evan and I climbed into a dark closet and tried to fix our lives. And when that didn't work, we watched About Time.
Welcome back to How Did You Miss This? A podcast where we try to correct our past mistakes by watching the movies we missed along the way. I'm Evan Toller-Hickey, and with me as always, Michael Hansen and Chris Deshane. And today we are talking about the 2013 romantic comedy About Time. And I guess it is about time that we talked about it because, Michael, you pushed really hard for this film. So before we get into how Chris and I missed this, I would really love to know your relationship with this film.
This is one of those that started maybe a little bit like the movie. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know the writer. I didn't know the connection to his previous movies. I just watched it and immediately fell in love with it. And I watched it probably, I don't know, less than 10 times more than 7. And I love it. To me, it hits so many notes that I look for in a movie. I think it is one of the sweetest ones out there. And I think that it has such a nice message. So for me, it's one of those, most people haven't heard about it, but I think it is just such a nice one to see. So I really wanted to share it with the two of you.
Now, how about you, Chris? I'm guessing you haven't seen this 8 or 9 times, which is more than 7, less than 10.
I mean, at this point, I've seen it twice, but before this podcast, I had seen it 0 times. I didn't know this existed, which is funny because, I mean, it's a Richard Curtis romantic comedy. He's made a bunch. They're all very successful. I think I liked all of them to a greater or lesser degree. So it is kind of wild that I didn't know this was out there. And like, I don't know. This is another one of those ones where I feel like the last few I've said, I don't know how I missed this because I didn't know this movie existed. So, until Michael kind of brought it up, was like, hey, have you guys seen this movie? And we were both like, that's a movie? I didn't even know this was a thing. So, but I'm totally surprised that it went under the radar for me. How about you, Evan? Because you haven't seen this either.
I haven't. And actually, quite deliberately have not seen this movie. This is one of those movies I recognized the poster, the cover art or the DVD cover art, VHS.
Is this in your closet as well?
Yeah, no. This one not, because this is like on every single plane. This is on every single plane, right? In there.
I watched it on a plane.
There you go.
So yeah.
Yeah. So every time I'd be scrolling by, I would see this terrible picture of, I mean, it's not terrible in that it's Rachel McAdams in the rain with About Time written above it, but like it gave me nothing that I really wanted to glom onto. I was sort of About Time. I was like, okay, this sounds like another Rachel McAdams in a romantic time travel movie. I don't know. She's
the poster looks like
here.
A very, very, very generic, like rom-com kind of thing. And you're like, yeah, I'm good.
Yeah. Like this could have been anything. It just did not excite me at all. So I wasn't super keen to watch this movie. But I'm very glad that I did.
Even the fact that you called it a romantic comedy, we're going to have to talk a little bit about that in this episode, because a few of the other movies we've talked about before, it's like the whole thing around trying to nail down what the genre is. I think this one exemplifies that quite a lot. So like I'm really looking forward to hearing it.
That'll be an interesting conversation, especially because it does come from Richard Curtis, who is, famous for all of his romantic comedies. So this is the third film that he directed. I mean, if you run through the list of stuff that he directed, he kind of was, I'm going to say, batting about 1,000, running from 1994 to 2004. So 94, he makes Four Weddings and a Funeral. 1997, he makes Bean, the Mr. Bean movie. 1999, Notting Hill. 2001, Bridget Jones's Diary. 2003, Love Actually. 2004, the sequel to Bridget Jones, Bridget Jones, The Edge of Reason. And then he makes a few more movies, Pirate Radio and Warhorse, 2009, 2011, before he made this in 2013. Like that stretch from 1994 to 2004, those are some of the like biggest romantic comedies there are.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like those movies have like a combined box office of like $1.5 billion or something insane like that, right?
Yeah, something insane like that. And so I actually did a quick pull up just because this is what I do for fun and I can't help myself. I pulled up the 30 largest grossing romantic comedies of all time. Mm-hmm. So those are basically movies that made over $200 million globally. And when you go down the list, I mean, there's a lot of like single appearances, something like My Big Fat Greek Wedding, which was huge, but you don't have the same writers or directors kind of appearing multiple times. There's only 4 names that show up multiple times on that list. One of them is Gary Marshall, who did Pretty Woman and Runaway Bride. So, right. I mean, Pretty Woman is like the biggest, right? But he was only the director. He didn't write these. He didn't create them. He was the director for those 2. So the 3 people who show up as the writers and directors, Nora Ephron, who shows up twice on that list of top 30. So you've got Mail and Sleepless in Seattle. Nancy Meyers shows up 4 times for What Women Want, Something's Gotta Give, It's Complicated, and The Holiday. And Richard Curtis shows up 5 times.
Wow.
On that top 30 list. So Notting Hill, Bridget Jones, Edge of Reason, Love Actually, and 4 Weddings. So, I mean, there's a really strong case to make here. Like, look, dollars and cents isn't the only way to measure quality. In fact, probably not the best way. But when you look at it and you say, like, those movies basically came one after another in that string of 10 years. Like, this is maybe one of the best runs that you have for a comedy writer out there, romantic comedy or otherwise, because he also did Bean and some other movies in there as well.
This is up there with that run that we talked about with Rob Reiner, where, you know, from like Stand By Me to like was A Few Good Men or something like that, which is just like year after year after year, just like
everything
really,
is a hit.
like, wow. I mean, super impressive, and also super impressive that like I'm glancing over some of the budgets on these, and like these are all like making more than $200 million movies, and it's like 4 Weddings and a Funeral, $4.5 million budget. You know, Notting Hill, $42 million budget. So like that's a pretty big one because it's got Julia Roberts in it and everything. But you know, makes back $364 million. So really, really bankable guy too. So again, like, why is this one such a sleeper?
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting one, and I'm not so sure how. I think that'll be an interesting thing to talk about. And I mean, I think pointing to where Michael was kind of, you know, pointing us earlier, like, this is a movie, About Time is a movie that gets made because Richard Curtis, you know, kind of after this kind of historic run of movies that he's got, was sitting around having lunch with a friend and pondering, like, how are you happy? How do you make yourself happy? How do you lead a happy life? And that whole question of, like, how do you lead a happy, ordinary life turned into the premise of this movie. And then, you know, he added time travel because a movie about people trying to make themselves happy kind of wasn't enough of a hook on its own. And that's how this movie kind of came to be. It was just like, how do you lead a happy life? Also time travel. But I, you know, that Richard Curtis saying, hey, I've got an idea for a movie, I think is more than enough to get you, you know, green lit. And then, so he wrote the movie, got produced, or got a production budget of $12 million. And then I think the interesting thing about this movie too is who gets cast in this. I mean, in a lot of his previous movies, it was some pretty well-known names, right? You had like Hugh Grant and, well, I mean, especially Hugh Grant. Hugh Grant is one of the kind of common folks through a number of his movies.
Yeah, him and Bill Nighy for sure.
Right. So you came into this one and you got 2 names. I mean, Rachel McAdams had been the it girl through the early 2000s and had reemerged, in 2009, also making another time traveling movie about the time traveler's wife. So maybe she's got this area locked down. But I think the interesting addition is Domhnall Gleeson, who, son of friend of the show, Brendan Gleeson, who wasn't really an established star at that point. He didn't carry the same kind of weight that, like a Hugh Grant would obviously bring to the movie. So I don't know if that's maybe part of it, but he comes into it as kind of the leading man in this movie. I think one of the interesting things is just, how this movie premieres, because it comes out in September of 2013.
Yeah, I mean, comes out September 2013. It does about $88 million at the box office. So not a particularly great showing in terms of a Richard Curtis film, but still makes its money back hand over fist. And I guess it was a huge hit in South Korea. It made twice its budget there, $24 million. I mean, generally positive reviews. Some people found it too earnest and saccharine. Some people really enjoyed the sincerity. A lot of people felt that there were lots of plot holes because it's a time travel movie, and that is one of the hallmarks of time travel movies, except Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. And, right now it's got a Rotten Tomatoes score of 70, which is on the low end of the films that we've looked at over the last while. But, I guess the question is Chris, are you happy that you've seen this movie now? Would you recommend this movie to anybody?
Yeah, so I was pretty happy watching this movie. I don't think it's a great movie, but I was really happy when I watched it, especially the first watch. I will say this. I was really happy on the first watch. I think this would be a fun, date night movie or whatever. It's a light watch to, Michael's kind of already pointed out that there's some thoughtful, very sincere stuff in this movie. When I rewatched it again for this podcast, I started noticing a lot of loose threads that as I noticed them more and started, I was like, oh, that's bothering me a little bit. But if you haven't seen this movie, it's, a fun, light, positive watch that, you feel pretty good about on the first thing, especially if you're not going to pull at any of those threads. But what about you, Evan? Yeah,
I couldn't agree with you more. I really enjoyed watching this film. It was a genuine surprise to me because, as I said, I went in not particularly keen, and just within the first couple of minutes, it already had me. It had that really great. I think Richard Curtis is just a very good writer at what he writes, and it was sweet. There are some very thoughtful moments. The acting is great. It is a really delightful, I'd say a romantic comedy in some ways. And I know that we'll get into this, but kind of maybe a romantic comedy for people who don't love romantic comedies. But it still has enough of those elements that I think this makes for a really good Friday night date movie.
Yeah, totally agree. Michael, how do you feel knowing that Evan and I are thinking we should curl up with loved ones and watch this?
I am super happy that the two of you enjoyed it that way. Now I'm looking forward to talking about specifically what parts you liked and kind of take it from there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to dig into on what kind of movie this is and what parts of it hold up. And I'm very curious how you feel about them after, I think you said more than 5 and less than 10 viewings. So maybe here's a good spot for a break. And on the other side, we'll talk about what we think about this movie. And we're we're back. So we are going to talk about all the things about time. That was 2 abouts in a row, and that was confusing for me too. But if you don't want spoilers, then stop listening or get ready. So what's this movie about? Well, this movie is about Tim Lake. And on his birthday, he finds out from his dad that the men in his family have the ability to travel through time. And as Tim uses his powers to navigate the ups and downs of his life, he realizes that tampering with time has consequences and some things can't be changed. So, I mean, we touched on it up front. I think one of the biggest questions about this movie is this a romantic comedy?
So I think it's a mistake to think of this as a romantic comedy. I think that the actual romance itself plays a backseat in the story. I think the bigger part of it is much more around the relationships between family, the siblings, and particularly the parental relationship, because it plays both in Tim with his dad and then his own children. And I think that really is the core of the movie. And the comedy as well, yes, sometimes it plays for laughs, but the comedy is much more sort of subtle. And I think if you go into it with that expectation, I think that you see a very different movie compared to if you walk in and say, oh, romantic comedy, and you expect it to be something like, let's say, Notting Hill.
Yeah, I think that's fair-ish. I would say that the romance part of this movie, I think you're right in the sense that like the comedy is not like punch up over the top constant throughout, but the romance takes up the first 2/3 of the movie. So that's where I'd say like I'd have a hard time describing this as something other than a romantic comedy, because the first 2/3 of the movie is dominated by him trying to have a love life and then wooing Rachel McAdams' character, and it's not until an hour and 20 minutes into the movie that they're married. So it's the like that is a huge chunk of the movie where you actually don't have most of the other folks. You don't have the family. You don't, you get little snippets of friends here and there, but it's really primarily focused on those two. I think this is also one of the challenges that on a second viewing, especially I had with the movie, where I wish it was less of the romance and more of the other stuff, because I found the other stuff a little bit more fulfilling than the romantic part of the movie.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Chris. That, I mean, certainly this has a lot of the elements of a romantic comedy, and its backbone is very romantic comedy-ish, and all of the twists in it are usually not all of the twists, but most of the twists in it are twists that make the relationship trickier and trickier, or easier and easier, depending on what Tim is doing. And then it becomes very much a relationship movie. And maybe that's one of the reasons why it hasn't garnered as much notice as it would normally have for like a Richard Curtis movie, is that it is maybe a little bit like neither fish nor fowl. I mean, certainly Tim as a character sets himself up to say that with time travel, it was always going to be about love for him. And that is absolutely true throughout. So that is consistent, whether it be his love for his girlfriend and then wife, or be it his love for his sister, or be it love for his father. That continues to be a very pertinent kind of motivating factor for him. But if I'm describing this to people, I'm probably going to lean on romantic comedy rather than like, well, it's like sort of a light time travel comedy.
It's a sentimental time travel story. Yeah, I'll say the same thing there. Like for me, so he doesn't say I'm interested in love. He says I want to get a girlfriend. right?
Well, he says that as his goal for sure.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
he does say that time travel was always going to be about love for me versus
totally
money.
agree. I'm just saying the setup in the beginning when his dad's like, you can time travel. He's like, what are you going to, you have to do something important with it. And he's like, I'm going to get a girlfriend.
The
and his
mothership.
dad's, yeah, right. But I'll say this, like, I think that's part of where, you know, this movie is 2 hours. It's a little long for my liking, but I think it's that long because it is kind of those two things wedged together, right? It's like a time travel romantic comedy that then has 30 minutes of what happens after the happy ending in what would be a normal movie.
Yeah, you know what? That's a really good way of seeing it. I think in the same way that we sort of like saw in Bruges, it was like, this is after the action movie and characters having to deal with all the collateral damage that they've racked up.
Right.
You know, this is the romantic comedy, the 90-minute romantic comedy. And then a half an hour of like, oh, this is where like shit gets real after.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. After you get married and the happy ending, you actually still have family and complications and kids and parents and whatever. Right.
Yeah. Do you accept that, Michael?
In a way, in the same way that I would expect you to say Harold and Maude follows a similar trajectory around. It is one thing and then turns into another thing. And you were completely okay with that. So, yeah, for sure. I accept that.
You seem completely okay with it in about time. So, you know. We're kind of the same. Chris is doubled up.
That was the best no without saying no. It's just like, that was a hard Swedish no, where it's like not quite a no, but I don't agree with you at all.
I'm going to put it this way. I'm a huge fan of, there's a Swedish director called Lasse Hallström, who has done a bunch of movies over the years. And they tend to go heavy on the sentimental. And it took me a while until I realized that if you think of them all as fairy tales, then if you do that, then they make sense. If you think of them as serious movies, realistic movies, you're going to be in trouble because they all fail on some critical points. And I think of it a little bit the same with this one, to say, maybe the reason I love it is because I see the thing around the sweetness and the relationships and the family part. And I'm going to say flat out, like, it makes me overlook some other things. But the same way that some people, and you know, generally speaking, the Hallström movies are very poorly rated on Rotten Tomatoes. But the people who like them, I think, really like them because they have a thing that appeals, which is that kind of more the story, fairy tale, sweet side of it. Yeah. And you have to buy into that. You can't go into it the same way that you would with, you know, a random other pick from that genre. And another playback, let's replay the quote about Mikael around genres, and genres are for, you know, reviewers, not for the viewers. So therefore, throw that out and just say it's going to appeal to some people, and for other people, not so much.
I'll say the thing for me is if this movie had leaned more into the relationship and family and that other stuff throughout, I think this would have been like one of my favorite movies ever, because I think that sentimentality and like the importance of kind of being present in your life and, you know, like living every day as if you had a chance to redo it, but you don't, you know, like that kind of, you know, moral or whatever that comes out of this movie is great. And the relationship with the dad is exceptional. And I wish there had just been more of all the other stuff and less of the romantic part. So or that it had been more interspersed with a little bit lesser romance, or whatever the right way to put that is. It's just because I found that that part about like, how are you happy? How do you lead your best life? And, you know, I find that kind of sits by the wayside for too much of the movie. And again, I'm saying this as a person who very much enjoyed this movie. I think the thing that would have taken this from a 4 out of 5 to a 5 out of 5 for me would have been if it had been less relationship and just more of the less like romance and more those other relationships throughout. Because, I found that final 20 minutes, where he finds out about his dad dying and then all the kind of things that come out as a result of that and all those moments that he has with his family. I'm like, if that was a movie filled with those, oh my God, like that, I would have just been like hugging something and in tears and hugging throughout. Whereas the rom-com was fine. Like the rom-com was good. It was nice. It was cute. They were adorable. But like that last 20 minutes, you're like, oh, this is an entirely different movie. And it's so nice. And so, oh my God, I want to go hug somebody right now because I love them so much.
I can't compete with Chris's sentimentality there. It's beautiful.
And I think that's kind of what it is for me, because I think the stakes throughout this movie aren't very high, right? Like it's like dude wants girlfriend. Dude finds girlfriend and then loses her because he time travels to help a buddy, then has to get girlfriend back. Like it is very rom-com setup, right? Guy meets girl, guy falls for girl, guy loses girl, guy gets girl back, add other stuff with time travel. So, I mean, I think that's one of the interesting things is like that kind of setup. It creates an interesting pacing throughout this movie because there's kind of these, side stories that come up if you want to like add the stakes to the movie. His friends play bombs and then his sister and then all these kind of things. So I'm curious what you think of that kind of structure where you've got your main romantic storyline, but then you've kind of got these zigs and zags over to like friends and family or whatever to tell those other parts of the story and add some of those stakes to it. Like, how did you feel that played out in terms of the structure and the pacing of this film?
I think you need them because it does give some kind of feeling of stakes, because when you can go back and just correct your mistakes, and he, several times, and it's very funny, and we'll do the conversation multiple times with someone and then decides like, okay, you know what? We're not even going to do that conversation. Not at all. Because it's going to turn out terrible every time. Let's not do this kind of thing. And so when you can go back and correct your mistakes, and there isn't sort of this massive butterfly effect that happens. Like this isn't one of those movies where time travel makes things go terribly, terribly wrong. Really?
Well, it does, and then they ignore it. But yeah, we'll get there. Yeah.
But like it's the sort of like he could have stopped himself from going back and helping, Richard E. Grant with his lines at the show, and still had the night with Mary where they kind of fall in love. That he could have totally done that. But I think it's interesting that they set up his character in a way, and I feel like I would have liked a little bit more push on this, that he doesn't. And he makes a conscious choice not to mess things up for his playwright friend, that he is there to make sure that his night goes really well, even at the expense of missing out on that first magical night with this magical woman kind of thing.
Not just that, but also misses out because him helping the playwright to do this, it also means that he has to eat a lot of crap because Harry sees him leave in the middle of the most sensitive scene and doing it. So he's not doing it to help the judge. He's doing it to help Harry.
Yeah.
And that part, I think that's what I mean about and I agree with you, like this is not a romantic comedy. This, they really should have downplayed that, because this is about relationships, period. It's about friendships. It's about doing things for other people. So I actually think that works super well, all these things. You get a sense of the sort of character that he is, what drives him, the decisions he makes. And for me, that works really, really well.
Yeah, I found some of those, I'll call them side quests. For the way the movie is structured, I found them a little bit overly lengthy, right? Like the Margot Robbie bits where she comes back, and then, it's really to like get him to the point where he asks Rachel McAdams to marry him, right? So there's these kind of like long like zigs over to one side to bring him back to a point. He goes to the play and helps his friend save the play so that he can learn, oh no, I've lost her number. there's consequences in some ways to doing this time travel thing, or I can't make somebody fall in love with me just because I time travel, or, there's a bunch of different stuff that kind of plays out there, which the way it's structured, I found a little long. I would have loved if they either reduced those or leaned more into them to make those, more of the stakes about it being much more about those other relationships too, because I found some of those folks like, Tom Hollander's character kind of disappears after the play. He pops up here and there again, but he doesn't really play a part in the movie besides being like, hey, I'm still here. Hi, it's your kid's birthday. So like, I wish there'd been a little bit more investment in those other relationships and less in the romance.
I will actually maybe contradict that a little bit because, the thesis of the movie is, how do you live a happy, ordinary life, but with time travel? And people do kind of come in and out of your life in parts where it's sort of like, oh, this person was like very heavily in my life for this period. And then they kind of disappear for a while. And they do kind of become like kind of minor characters in your life for a while, and then maybe something brings you back together and they're there again for a bit. But like that actually felt really sort of true and authentic to me, that like Harry was there for some big things and then kind of disappears a little bit and will pop up in little bits and pieces. And to the Margot Robbie showing back up bit, I mean, yeah, it would kind of went on a little bit, but I also think that was such an important scene. Again, it's one of these things that shows the kind of person that Tim is, because he could have gone and slept with Margot Robbie and then just gone back in time and not done it so that he remembers that he's done it, but like it's not happened. So cheating never really happened, did it? But he doesn't. He goes, you know what? Thanks. It was lovely to see you. And instead he goes home and proposes to Rachel McAdams. And that I thought was, again, one of those like nice sort of character moments for Tim.
I really agree with what you said. And it comes back to you see kind of what you bring in with this movie. So if you go in with that type of mindset, you will see those things and it's going to be really enjoyable. And I think if you go in with different expectation, you might see something else. But for me, that's what I take away from it. And I think that it's just a way to show him making these decisions. He could have retried. He had a couple of failed attempts when he runs into her and her friend at the theater. And they have some fun with the mix up about her girlfriend. But he gives up on that. He was like, no, I'm just going to leave. So they already show there that, he's not going to do it an infinite number of times. So I think that there are these clues that are very helpful about him as a character. What does he value? How does he think? What his decision process? So for me, that works.
So let me ask one question here. In terms of, let's say both of you were able to travel through time. Is Bill Nighy possibly the absolute worst teacher and guardian of a power that can mess up your life? Because he seems to be very willy-nilly about some very important rules, because we only find them out like 3/4 of the way through the movie. Like, oh yeah, if you travel back after your kid, yeah, you're going to ruin everything.
If Bill Nighy gave me the worst advice in the world and he did it with the way that he acts now, I would still say, oh, Chucks. Like, he is just the sweetest person in this movie. I couldn't blame him for anything. I would just give him a hug. And then I would say, okay, let's play another round of ping pong.
As your children have dramatically transformed into other people.
Yeah. And so what he does is he goes back and he doesn't do it. And then his children are fine. So he learned it on his own.
So let me ask a question here, because for me, they are very loosey-goosey with the application of their own rules about time travel.
Yep.
Okay. I'm glad we're at least agreed on that, because the whole, you can't travel back to before your kid was born because it's, a bajillion sperm and you can never guarantee it's the same one, or your kid will be different. And then they immediately fix the fact that he time traveled back to before his kid. and it's his kid again. There's no way to do that after you've done it because you changed your kid and you're now in the future. I'm just saying they undo that rule very quickly just to make it happy again.
Well, he doesn't go back in time with his sister to before the kid was born. That was,
but he already did. So then he had to have made a choice to somehow. How do you not go back into the past when you've already gone back into the past? I'm just saying. Yeah, very loosey goosey with time travel.
All the way down. Just the same way. It's like, okay, let's go back to our past and be a father and a young son. We basically won't break the rules. It'll be fine. We can have this last really sentimental moment.
What's the harm that it could do? Nothing, I guess, because it's nice right now. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, they pave over all the time travel oopsies that they would do. Just by making it nice. Like, it's very nice. It's very sentimental. And you're like, when he time travels back with his dad for that last moment, you're like, oh my God. Oh my God. You're like, you're tearing up and you're just like, I love everything about this. But oh my goodness, especially on the second watch, the time travel stuff was really, really getting to me, where it's like, okay, if you can time travel with somebody else, how come you're not time traveling with your wife? I'm just saying.
Yeah. There is that.
I think that there's an element of that is probably similar to if you were a cast of the original Star Trek TV show and you go to these conventions over the years and someone says, but it's interesting because in season 1, episode 7, you did this thing. And they're like, it was just a show. I think this movie is not about time travel. I think this movie is not primarily a romantic comedy. I think this movie is about about relationships with family and friends. And I think it's got some beautiful teachings about how to live your life. Time travel happens to be a thing. The way I look at it when I enjoy it is that doesn't even show up. I don't even think about it. Time travel is like, that's an interesting thing, but that's not what this movie is about for me.
So do you feel that this movie should have been called About Relationships? Yeah, no, this movie should have been called Bill Nighy is so damn charming.
Well, and he is. So let's talk about Bill Nighy, because I feel like he got underused in this movie because every scene he's in, he's great. Like, he's just delightful. Again, this kind of goes back to my, like, I wish it had been more about the family and the like those other aspects, those other relationships that they had, because like, even when he's just throwing in like those one-liners about playing table tennis and he's like, oh, I'm so good without the ball. I'm like, oh, dude, you are just so good in this.
Yeah. I mean, I think that everyone in this movie is really good. Like, this might be one of my favorite Rachel McAdams performances. I thought Donald Gleason was delightful. Maybe Bill Nighy was used the perfect amount. You know, it's like a seasoning. You know, it's just, I'm so excited to see him when every time he's on screen. Just kind of like I'm kind of excited to see Harry every time he's on screen.
You know what I wish there'd been more of? There's that moment, again, in that like last 25 minutes or whatever, that is an entirely different movie almost. It's that extra stuff where Tim goes back and sees his dad when he, his dad is gone, and he's going to have Tim's going to have another kid, and he goes back and sees his dad, and it's the like his dad has that moment where he's like, oh, like, and like, there's that moment of like recognition of like, I understand you're time traveling right now. Same at the wedding when they go out in the hallway and the dad is like, I wasn't thrilled with that speech. And, Donald Gleason's like, it was fine. I understand. The I love you was implied. Like, and then you see him time travel again. I wish there had been more of that interaction with Bill Nighy, where there's almost those moments of like, hey, are you time traveling right now? Uh-huh. Like, oh, how's it going for you? Like, I wish there'd been more of those interactions where, because they both have this common bond of understanding how to time travel and that there's ways to make your life better as a result. And, you don't want to miss out on those moments. I wish there'd been more of those like time travel bump ins. I don't know a better way to call it, but those like moments where they're just like, hey, are you or are you future you right now? Like,
so look, I think of it like, remember Jaws and how the mechanical shark didn't work. And because the mechanical shark didn't work, they only had it in a couple of scenes, and in the end, it was like so much better for it because it was terrifying. I think in this one, the amount of sprinkling of Bill Nighy is amazing because every time I see him, I just go, that is the best dad ever. And it just lifts everything. And I think that doing it more may have overdone the effect because like his thing, like, just like you said, I wish I'd said I love you. And when he recognizes the thing to say, have we done this before? Like all of these things is just amazing to me. And I think that if they'd done it more, it probably would have been overdone. I think he could have been better cast. And I think that they used him extremely well for this.
To me, one of the biggest sort of like bombshell moments was when Tim realizes that the reason that his dad retired at 50 to spend time with the family and just play ping pong and stuff was because he knew that he was going to die of cancer later on down the line. It's just like that really got me.
It's the best. He said like the only people who retire at 50 to play, ping pong, table tennis with their kids. Yeah, that incredibly powerful. But it only works because of the build up to that point. And the same with his wife, like the mother. She also is brilliant in her restraint. If they did the entire movie about that, it would be a different movie. But I think that the way that they have them in this, I think is just incredibly effective.
I think maybe now is a good time for a break. And on the other side, maybe what we can do is talk about the folks who played the leading roles in the movie. Welcome back. So the two leading folks in this movie, Domhnall Gleeson and Rachel McAdams, I mean, they are front and center for a huge chunk of this movie. I'm curious, Evan, like, what did you think about these two as the leading couple in this movie?
I thought they were delightful. Like just delightful through and through. I thought they had great chemistry. I really liked the way that their relationship goes from, the heady early days to the really like deeply committed, years of marriage kind of thing. I thought that like Domhnall Gleeson is so charming and so lovely, and it's so different than his character of like General Hux in the Star Wars movies, yeah. or I think he did an episode of Black Mirror that's super creepy in the first season where he plays like the android simulation of himself, and it's really sad. And yeah, like I really enjoyed him. I'm like, I want to see Domhnall Gleeson in more romantic comedies. And Rachel McAdams was great in it. I think sometimes, I've seen her kind of get, not outacted isn't the right word, but like kind of out star powered in movies. Like I think about like Sherlock Holmes that she was in with Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law. And those two guys have so much like movie star power.
They absorb the spotlight in a different way.
Yeah. And as a result, she seemed really diminished in that role. Whereas like in Wedding Crashers or like even Doctor Strange, like she feels, I don't proper sized. I don't know if that's the right analogy, but in this movie, she felt perfect to me. Like I know that there was a casting near miss here with Zooey Deschanel in the part of Mary, and I don't think that would have worked as well. I think that she is too like, especially at that time, like too quirky, too manic pixie girl, as we talked about. I'm glad that she was in 500 Days of Summer. Like that is like the perfect Zooey Deschanel romantic comedy movie. Whereas like this is like Rachel McAdams is just great in this.
I really agree with you about the chemistry because the second that you hear them together in the dark restaurant,
it's just a great scene. I really love that.
They're so natural. Their conversation is so natural. And then the will you walk me to my car thing, and they just end up talking and walking. Like all of this is so natural and it's terrific. But it's also interesting, like your point about her in the presence of other ones. Like one of my guilty pleasure movies is a movie called Morning Glory, where she's with Harrison Ford and she plays this TV producer, and she's got a major, like the lead role, but there's this risk of her being with these crazy big stars. But I just love her in it, and I think she's terrific. But I can totally see what you're talking about, where to live up against that can be really difficult. But here, I think that just the balance, her amount of time in this movie, the role, the fact that she actually is a character of her own. She's not just some sort of like a second bit character. Like she is believable on her own. I think she's perfectly cast for this. So it's interesting. You mentioned about Pixie Girl, and what I thought about this and seeing Kit Kat, like there's a theme that keeps coming up in his movies where you have this character who represents that. Like it's the sister here. In Notting Hill, you have the similar sister who's also weird, quirky, and goes through things and has a disappointment. It's like all these elements of these kind of like archetypes that keep showing up again. I think she did a terrific job in this in some ways, and in other ways, I felt like she had a tough job to do because of the role. But the character itself, I thought, was very important to kind of highlight the difference in his protection for her and care.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it is really interesting seeing like the manic pixie girl, not from the protagonist's romantic point of view, but that as someone he loves, and then watches sort of the magic get crushed out of her. I thought like was a really, it's like Kit Kat has a solid arc in this film.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think my only issue with the Kit Kat arc is, again, that time travel wonk that comes in as part of it, where her crash and whatever later on when he tries to go back and save her, change her for the future for the better, and then immediately undoes it magically somehow by time traveling to it. I don't know how you undo the time travel that you already time traveled.
You stop yourself from time traveling, right?
How? You are you. I don't know how you do that. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. So I just found that was that frustrated me a little bit, and then somehow she wound up okay anyway. That was kind of the. Well,
I mean, she made her choice on her own. I mean, it's that sort of thing. It's like you can't, if somebody's an alcoholic, you can't stop them being an alcoholic until they want to stop themselves, right? And that's one of the things that she comes to her own decision on. And then he knows that in alternate timeline that he didn't like so much because his kid has changed, that she's with his buddy Jay, right? And so it's like, oh, okay, so maybe there is something there, because all the time travel in the world can't make you love someone, or can't make someone love you, as he says early on. So there must be a little bit of something. So, hey, let's mention, Jay, kind of thing. And so it kind of works out. Even though apparently she's a terrible mom.
Apparently. Yeah, he shouts it out right. Like first scene she has it with a baby, like not a good mom. But anyway, she's happy now. I do want to touch on one other thing about this whole time travel thing, not about how they goof it up, because they goof it up left and right. But when he loses track of Mary as a result of helping out, his pal with his play, he then has to go stalk her to find her again and then make her fall in love with him. I wasn't totally in love with that bit. I found that a little like, ooh, this is a little awkward.
Yeah. Don't love the normalization of stalking there. It's kind of awful. And that scene in the Kate Moss exhibit.
Exactly. Yeah.
It really does border on creepy, and also like creepy, angry,
like entitled in a way, right?
Entitled. Thank you. That's exactly it.
Because it's
creepy,
you
angry,
love
entitled.
me. You just don't know you love me yet. And it's like, ooh. So I will say on the first watch, I had no problem with it. There's some like, okay, this is fine, I guess. When I watched it the second time, I really didn't love that stretch. So that's one of those ones where I started pulling on a thread there, and I was like, ooh, this is not my favorite bit. I get what we're doing. He goofed up. He doesn't want to change things because his friend, and he's learned a lesson here about, you go back and make a change. It means you undo the other stuff. But like, I wish that had been a little bit less of that stalkery. I'm waiting for you for like 25 days in the art gallery and then just poking you as if we're familiar like that. And then, that part bothered me. I'm curious, Michael, is that like a thing that you're like, I don't know. How do you feel about that stretch?
Completely agree with you. Like, I think that's probably the weakest point, because it is, I kind of get why he felt he had to write it that way, but it has not aged well, because it is creepy. Exactly like you say, it's by the time that he has a chance to sit down. So he figures out to meet at the house party, meet up with her and go for a meal. Then it's like, from that point on, sure, he had to actually be genuine, and everything from that point on he had to do genuinely. But to get to that point, it is really weird and creepy. And again, like that scene you mentioned with the sitting at the art gallery, it is simultaneously really cheesy with the music going on and kind of like, oh, you see people come and go, and creepy because he's got that whole thing rehearsed around. But wouldn't you agree that, her period when blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, I that's not my favorite part of this movie.
It's like Matt Dillon in Something About Mary, where he's been listening in with the listening device. And then he's like, that Harold and Maude is the most romantic movie ever made. And it's like, oh, God. Yeah. OK.
The difference there is that Matt Dillon can continue to be Matt Dillon. But in this case, he actually showed his true self, and, they had a very successful life.
Yeah. So I do think one of the interesting choices that's made in this film is that time travel isn't like, it's not some sort of like Doctor Who zipping through the things. They step into a closet. It's dark.
Don't need to go 88 miles an hour.
Exactly. Yeah. There's nothing super special.
And I am here for it.
I agree.
I thought that was one of the best things about the movie. Like, it's like time travel, just go into like a quiet, dark space, clench your fists and just think, and then you'll be there. Awesome. That's great.
Yeah. The simplicity of it, I very much enjoyed. I will say this is another one of those like inconsistencies where you're like, wait, he time traveled back and his old self stepped out of a closet. Well, what happened to the person who was just talking to him at the party 30 seconds ago that he just disappeared and is now walking down what? So there's a few of those where I'm like, okay, I get it. I'm overthinking this. But also on a second watch, it made me furious. But I do agree that just the simplicity of the time travel, no special effects, no, like Star Wars light streaming by the closet or like magic poofs of light. Just like, all right, I'm in a closet in different clothes and I step out of the closet. It's easy. It's great.
It's a really good point, because it's like there's somewhere in between the ridiculousness of Harry Potter Quidditch that has no rules. Someone just made it up and it's like, it's the most ridiculous thing. And something like, I don't know, Tenet, where you try to kind of figure out every rule possible in the world for how you're going to manage time travel. This is more like time travel is secondary, but they take it a little bit seriously. And also, one thing you need to keep in mind is that living room that he went back to for the New Year's party was very big and very crowded. So they were all intermingling. He probably ran into himself and they didn't even notice it. So that's the answer right there. It was so big and they were so drunk.
I will say it's just partly because in other scenes, he doesn't disappear into a closet. Like when Margot Robbie asks him to put the sunscreen on her back, and then he goes back and he just appears as himself reading on the lawn. He doesn't have to like run outside from a closet afterward. It's a little inconsistent. That's all I'm saying. But
but that's also the magic of movies. Like he ran inside and then he came back outside and then settled down and opened his book. And then she was like, hey, can you put the sunscreen on my back? And we don't need to see him walking out of the house and lying down and picking up the book, because
totally get it.
That makes it longer than 2 hours.
I just felt like there could have been like a whole syllabus that Bill Nighy had to fill him in on like, all right, now when you time travel back in time, you don't want to just time travel back to any moment. You need to travel back to a time when you were on your own anyway. Like, try to aim it for when you were in the bathroom. Do you remember when you were in the bathroom 10 years ago? So
but Chris, where would they have found the time to do that?
When they're time travelers, they could have figured it out. But yeah, absolutely. I think that part of it made me very happy that it was, I mean, it's a simple premise. You can time travel in a closet. All right, cool. I don't need more than that. I like the way that they executed that. And I will say one of the things that I actually liked about how this movie looked too, beyond the lack of special effects, is that the way that they shot all those family scenes, especially, you know, when they're on the beach and he's having those memories of his childhood and kind of those like flashbacky kind of moments, is just the way that those are shot. They're shot with like extra soft lighting and like it feels very, very nostalgic, very dreamy, very kind of like hazy in a way. I think it did a really good job of tying into that setup, you know, at the beginning of the movie and at other points throughout, where there's this like sense of like, my family is great. I love my family. We had the best of times growing up, and just that visual appeal of the way that they shot that. I don't know. That really resonated for me because it made it that extra kind of like dreamy, nostalgic sense of like, my family was great and I love my family. I'm like, yeah, I get it. Then it comes across on the screen.
And you want to spend time with them. And I want to have, like, as someone who does have tea on the beach with their family when I'm in Cape Breton, like, it made me like really pine for that. Like I just can't wait to be like home in Nova Scotia with my family on the beach, having tea, like all those things. It was beautiful.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of a central thing for a lot of this, is like it gets those beats right when it comes to especially the nostalgia of family and kind of those moments where a number of us here have lost parents, and it's just that sense of like loss and longing that goes on, and nostalgia for those moments that you had with them. It gets those beats really right. And I think that's what makes this movie so special. And quite honestly, that's why I'm like, I wish there was more of that in the movie, because those are the parts that spoke to me a lot more. So I'm like, you know, I miss my dad. I wish we could talk more about the dad in this movie. So that's obviously where I'm leaning in on this. But I mean, it gets those sentimental beats right. And it really does, like, it does it so well.
I think I thought many times that it's weird that they were able to even do all these things and sit and have all these moments together and watch movies on every Friday night or whatever it was. But then when you hear the explanation about why he did it, like, again, someone turning 50 and deciding to do this, and it's like, oh yeah, that's very sweet. I agree with you about how it's shot and the visuals. The one thing that I have a big issue with visually is the wedding itself, with the rain and the ridiculous wind and all of that. Like, that just feels like, okay, we get that it rained and it was very windy, but that was just like someone cranked it up to 11 on that shot.
I mean, it is the Cornish coast. That is not like out of huge character weather.
Yeah.
Hey, Evan, if I wanted you to come in and defend something about this movie, don't defend the wind and rain effect.
No, I'm going to, and I actually think that I'm going to double down on this. I think that scene is super important because he says to Rachel McAdams, like, is there anything you'd want to change about this? And she was like, no,
nothing.
It's perfect.
Exactly. So, thank you.
Yeah. And so, like, to me, their wedding being like destroyed, ruined, or whatever, right, by this massive rainfall, and him not changing it because it's perfect. That's exactly the way that, you know, that it should have gone, is really beautiful. Like, it's a really important moment, I think. So there we go. Double down on the weather.
You're such an inconsistent weirdo, and I love you.
I love you too, Michael.
They both had to time travel back to get that one in.
Speaking of my love for both of you, one of the really beautiful things in this movie is Uncle Desmond at the end saying like, when your father said that he loved me, that was like the best day of my life. Michael, could you please explain to me something about Uncle Desmond, who is, a pretty funny character? Whose brother is he? Is he Bill Nighy's brother? Is he Lindsay Duncan's brother? Like, so is he a lake? Can he travel through time, or is he Bill Nighy's brother-in-law? Is he Mary's brother?
It is a brilliant question. So, like I said, I've watched it between 7 and 10 times.
8 or 9.
I never thought about that before, because I assumed he's Bill Nighy's brother. Just assumed it, and I never stopped to think about the time travel, because I just thought he was such a critical person for that. Like that scene that you mentioned, like that was the best day of my life. So I think this might be my worst type of thing. I thought that was brilliant. You got so much about him, and I never thought about it until you asked the question. So thank you.
Okay, so
I don't have an answer for you, but like, thank you.
So the answer is nobody knows. Okay.
No, nobody knows.
Okay. It's like one of life's mysteries now.
And as we have just had an important lesson, I think one of the things about this movie is it wraps up with a pretty critical lesson. It's the whole, if you want to do life right, live each and every day, paying attention and being present and making the most of it. I'm curious, like, I mean, it's kind of a big moral wrap up to this film, that he learns he doesn't need time travel to lead life properly. I'm curious, like, what did you guys think of that kind of takeaway and lesson at the end of this film?
I thought it was really beautiful. Straight up. Like I thought that, so there are actually two things that are sort of involved with the time travel. And the first is like Bill Nighy's words as to how to live a happy life, which is to live the day and then to go back and relive it without the stresses, because you know what's coming, and just really savor the day. And I thought that was amazing. And then Tim takes it one step further and he's like, I don't even time travel anymore. I just do the second version, which again is both of those things are really beautiful. And, but one which a normal person can do.
Yeah, like that. The way that they kind of conclude that, I think, is brilliant. The way that they show the acting, the second version of reliving a day, the little things, the little smiles, the little thank you, the nods, the acknowledgement of people. To me, that is just so beautiful. And then he says this thing, the voiceover, like, but of course, some days you only want to live through once, and then they cut to the funeral. Yeah. And it's just like, it's so brutal. And the whole thing then around like the dad that of course knew like where he came from, and said, and he asked that, like, where did he come from? And then they have that conversation, and it's brilliant. So then at the very end of the movie, where they do that, exactly like you say, you realize that you should only live it once. And it's got this amazing thing around like, enjoy the extraordinary, ordinary life. And to me, like, that's why I say, like, this is not a romantic comedy. Like, this is about the relationships, how to live your life, how to live it to the fullest, how to enjoy all of these people. That's why it hits me every single time, and why I don't even think about time travel or any inconsistencies. I just go like, yeah, I'm in all the way.
Yeah, I definitely think that's what it gets right, and it's definitely the part that I think I take away from the movie, and I think probably other folks would too. So that's why I think we're all probably saying it's worth a watch, and I think that's probably a good place to call it for this one. So that's what we thought about time. We'd love to know what you thought about this movie. You can always email us at howdidyoumissthisat@gmail. Switching up because Twitter, X, whatever. We don't need it. So you can email us at howdidyoumissthisat@gmail.com. And while you're out there on the internet, do us a favor and send us any questions that you might have that you might want us to cover, or if there's any movies that you've missed that you'd like us to watch on your behalf. So if you enjoy what we're doing here, do us a favor, take a second to rate, review, or subscribe wherever you happen to be listening. And we're going to be back next week with a bit of a special episode to not talk about movies we haven't seen, but to talk about movies that we have. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you then.